the 2021 Montpelier-Roxbury School Board of Directors meeting at 6:33. So first order is public comment. Do we have anyone live or virtually who would like to give public comment? Yeah. Yes. Oh. Yes, if you do, please come up to the front and announce yourself.
All right, I'm Carmen Skinder. And that's Gabe Groveman, and we're some representatives from Earth Group at the high school.
Cool.
So we came here, as you may remember, last year to discuss the implementation of a net zero plan for the school district. Currently, the city of Montpelier has one, but it excludes the school district, and we're some of the biggest emitters of carbon in the city.
And we're just thinking that, especially since we have some extra funds this year, it's like an especially good time to think seriously about implementing that policy.
So in the past, we have discussed forming a committee to come up with a plan to do so, because obviously it's a lot to take on. And we'd be really excited and happy to work with the school board on a way to make that come to fruition. I don't know if Gabe has anything to add.
I mean, yeah, just that it's like a pretty big opportunity right now to use some of this money to take a better look at how we heat the school and where our energy comes from. And to the point about how this affects students' well-being and health, I think climate change and the climate crisis in our environment is a pretty big part of students' health and well-being and everything like that. And I think that's pretty important and a pretty big part of what Montpelier stands for. So hopefully we can use this as an opportunity to move that forward.
Excellent. No, thank you very much. We are definitely thinking about climate as we invest ESSER funds, and something we're going to talk about more throughout the year. So we really want to be able to thank you for coming.
Thank you.
It's a super important issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. Anyone else for public comment? So on to the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, everything except Grant's resignation, because we're not.
I would approve that.
Is it possible? Can we just?
Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Do I have a second?
Second. Joe Beasley.
It's a tie.
I think Joe got it.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And Kristen, I'm assuming you voted aye.
I did say aye, yes, thanks.
So speaking of Grant, it's our second budget presentation. Thank you for coming again, and I'll hand it over to you.
Great, and
Okay, Grant, I'm sorry. Can you repeat for 1 second? Did Anna send you today new hire?
Yes.
No.
Oh, yes.
A new what?
Yeah,
A new
I saw a
hire.
warning.
Okay.
Or the
A
word.
new hire. A new hire.
Yes, she did.
She did? Do we
Yeah.
need to say it? I just want to make sure that that gets passed as well.
Let's make sure.
Sorry to interrupt. I just remember.
I did not see it. So it's on calls.
Yep. Hold on. If it was
246.
Okay.
it's not listed on the consent agenda, so I move to approve the new hire.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm happy about that hire.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah.
All right, Grant, sorry.
no, that's fine. So the first presentation is like 40 pages and it's a lot of detail. The second one is just changes, so it's not very much. That's the good news. The bad news is the next one is a public forum. So we're back to a big one again. So enjoy tonight while you can. I will tell you that the PDF that you were sent with your board materials, there's been a few real small changes. So what you're going to see on the screen has a few different bullets than you might have, but nothing significant. And I'll try to call those out. So Anna, thank you for sharing that briefing. If you could go to the next page. So this is just a reminder, the last presentation included all of the bullets that you see. It is posted on the board's webpage. If you get to the school board's webpage under mrpsvt.org and then go to the school board, there's a button that says budget. Click on that and you'll see last time's presentation. It includes all of those details. Next, please. Now, the outline for today is much more simple. It's just changes to go over what are still unknowns, give you a quick glance at what the budget looks like, and then go into the tax rates and then remind you of the outlook and give you a summary. Next. Next, Anna. Thank you. So the changes, there's quite a few actually. We talked about it last time that we just got the dollar yield right before we came in here. That dollar yield is fantastic news from a tax rate perspective. So what I'm doing right now is on this presentation, I used the scenario B recommendation, which is the one that's not quite as high, and it's the one that does not assume that we're going to use that the state will use the full $90 million surplus. So hopefully it's a conservative number and it won't get any worse. It does dramatically drop the tax rates. On the flip side, the common level of appraisal, we talked about that a little bit, and the fact that home prices are going through the roof, which means the CLA will drop and tax rates will go up. We were a little concerned that maybe I hadn't dropped that CLA assumption enough. So I dropped it some more, and I'm hoping, especially for Montpelier, that the additional 4% that I reduced it will be safe. Roxbury is a little bit of a wild card because last year their CLA went up for some unknown reason. And so if there's a correction, they could really drop down. I just don't know. And hopefully we'll know soon. I would say hopefully by the end of the month, maybe. 23rd. Merry Christmas. So we'll see that soon. And for the January 5th presentation, that will be plugged in. So that'll be one less thing that's unknown. Also, since the tax rate was coming down a little bit, we talked about the fact that we have 5 ESSER funded positions and the desire we have to try to make sure that those are sustainable, to try to pull those into the local funding. One position already had been done at UES. We looked at the other positions and we're looking at this community liaison position thinking this is certainly something we want to hold on to. It looks like it's a permanent thing that we're going to need. So we shifted that ESSER funded position into local funds. And with those 3 statements there, you're going to see later on, and I don't mean to spoil the surprise, but later on, you're going to see that the tax rates from this year to next year right now are pretty much level, which would be fantastic. But there are still those unknowns, so I'm a little nervous still, but we'll see. Expenses, so we got a statewide pre-K tuition rate, which was a little bit higher than I assumed, so it increased the cost by $2,000. There's a higher tech tuition rate, but that's an on-behalf payment that we see actually an expense and a revenue. So even though the total expense goes up, the revenues went up too, so it really didn't change the ed spending amount. And then there's higher retirement rates. And what that is the Vermont State Teacher Retirement. They have an assessment, 2 different assessments. One is for any federally funded teacher. And so you have to pay a percentage of the salary toward this retirement. That rate was higher than I thought it would be. But that's also another one where that expense goes up, but the revenue does too, because these are federal funds. So there's no change in ed spending. Unfortunately, the other assessment relates to new teachers and health benefits. So teachers that are new to the retirement program, we have to pay an assessment to make sure that the health benefits are covered. That was a little higher than I assumed as well. So that did increase the budget and ed spending by about 3,000. So not big numbers, thankfully, but a little bit. So Anna, next, please. So what is still unknown are to me right now, the biggest unknown is equalized pupils. We know our data is going to be good. So we were hoping that might mean that we'll see an increase, but it's always a little bit of a mystery for equalized pupils, right? Because equalized pupils, one of the calculations is an equalizing ratio that gets thrown in at the end. So even though we're looking good and maybe increasing, if somebody else is increasing even more, then they might have to bring everybody down a little bit so that the number of equalized pupils equals the actual number of pupils. So because of that little strange kind of witchcraft that happens, I never really know what's going to happen with equalized pupils until I see it. And then when we do see it, we typically see 3 or 4 versions of it. So we have a long way to go for equalized pupils, but hopefully by the 5th, we'll get at least 1 or maybe 2 versions so that we can start getting closer to a real number there.
An outside consultancy to clean up our data around this. So our numbers around equalized pupils that we put towards the state are probably the cleanest we've ever had, because there was a lot of weird snafus in our system based on turnover of staff and things like that. So we're pretty confident in the numbers that we gave to the state.
Right.
And they look
So-
good from our end.
Yeah. But, you look at things like free and reduced population, there's a factor that gets thrown in that really increases your numbers. And our free and reduced population isn't really that high and others are. So you could see that maybe others might really be expanding their counts, which then at the end, if everybody's brought down, even though we're increasing, we may not be increasing. So that's why I'm a little unsure about that. The dollar yield is still on here because even though we have the tax commissioner recommendation, it has to be set by law. And that doesn't happen until after town meeting day. So that's going to be an unknown all the way through this process. But we're using a number that I think is as good as we're probably going to get. And it's a good number. So you'll still see this for probably all the way through, but I don't expect that we're going to actually have a final until after everything's done. Common level of appraisal, we talked a little bit about this. Now you can see, I'm assuming a drop of 6.4% in Montpelier and 8.2% in Roxbury. As I said, I'm pretty confident that that Montpelier assumption is going to be safe. But Roxbury, just because there's a weird factor in Roxbury that was causing some problems, so much so that even though they were around 100%, which means you shouldn't have to worry about a reappraisal, they are reappraising because there was a problem with their calculation. So I really don't know about that. I'll be relieved when I see that number on the 23rd. And the other unknown is Tech Center 6th semester average. That one I do think has a good chance of being higher than what we assumed. And for every kid that it goes up, it's about $18,000 or so. So if we're off by a few kids, that could be $35,000 to $40,000. So there could be a little bit of an unpleasant surprise for expenses in that area, but we'll have to see. All right, Anna, please. So at a glance, there's like $2,000 or $3,000 maybe difference from what you had in your original packet. Compared to December 1st, the total budget is going up 4.5% now. If you remember, it was 4.4 before. The ed spending was showing, I think, 3.5 last time, and it's up to 4% now. And a big part of that is that position that we shifted from federal funds to local. So even though that didn't increase our expense budget because it was already in there, it reduced our non-tax revenues, which meant our ed spending went up. But once again, we did that because the dollar yield looked good and we thought it would be a good time to put that in and get that position sustained. Equalized pupils is highlighted, obviously, because we still don't know. And spending per pupil increase of about 4%. Just so you have a point of reference, though, the excess spending threshold this year is $19,977. So we are over $2,000 under the threshold. So we're in great shape for the foreseeable future. Next, please, Anna. And actually, you can go one more. So the tax rates, the next one, please. There we go. I'm not going to go through the terminology because we did this last time, but anytime I show the tax rate calculation, I try to keep this chart in there so that people have this for reference. So this just spells out the terms and what they mean. And so if you get asked any questions, you can have some answers. The actual calculation, you saw the top part in that at a glance. What you didn't see was the property dollar yield being thrown in here. And then the tax rate. And let's see, the common level of appraisal is still highlighted, but it's 4% lower than the last time you saw it. And the important thing that people will look at is the very bottom line, the residential tax rate with CLA. You can see for Montpelier, 1.772 compared to last year, this current year at 1.774. And then Roxbury, 1.47 compared to 1.466. So both of those are within a penny. If you round it off, it's not even a penny. So that would be great if this is where we end up. I did call out in those text boxes kind of the impact of some of this so that you kind of get a feel for it. For instance, if the property dollar yield hadn't increased, if it was the same, then the tax rate would be 21 to 25 cents higher than it is. That's a huge amount. The merger incentive, having to absorb that loss of 2 cents of an incentive, is about 2.5 cents when you factor in the CLA. And then the drop in CLA is huge. If the CLA was level, Montpelier's tax rate would be almost 14 cents lower, and Roxbury's would be almost 12 cents lower. So you'll see big swings going the opposite direction. The dollar yield is a favorable impact, CLA and the loss of that merger incentive is a negative. But when everything is all factored in together and settles out, it's less than a penny. And we are able to pull that community liaison position into the local budget. Now, realize, as I mentioned, some of those things are still unknown, so some things could still change. So I don't want to get too excited yet, but right now we're looking good. Next, Anna. The next slide shows the tax rate impact. I'm afraid Anna has a hard time hearing me through the system here. There we go. Since the estimated tax rates were pretty much level, as you saw on that last slide, the impacts are really minimal. So you can see for every $100,000, Montpelier would have a $3 decrease in a tax bill. For Roxbury, it's a $4 increase because it's 0.3 cents and 0.4 cents. So very minimal changes. And we'll keep refreshing this as we have changes in the tax rates. So next, please. And the next slide that you're going to see is that tax rate history that shows you the line charts. And basically is a kind of a reminder that, that we're in pretty good shape compared to where we were before we merged. So and in fact, if you look at this, the only negative trend is Montpelier's tax rate with CLA factored in, which we can't control the CLA. Everything else looks good compared to when we merged. Montpelier's tax rate without CLA is 15 cents lower than back in 18. And in Roxbury, even if you factor in CLA, which we can't control, it's 25 cents lower than before we merged. So each year you may kind of have a different perspective, but if you go all the way back to before the merger, we're doing pretty good. Next, please. Oh, okay. So I should just start talking.
Yeah, just start talking, it'll come up.
So the next slide is the outlook slide, which was provided in the last briefing. I just leave it in here because it's good to keep these things in mind, because you don't only want to think about the budget you're building, you want to think about the budget you're building and what the next budget and the budget after that might look like as far as tax rates and managing things. So I just wanted to remind people, reappraisals are happening right now. That'll be a big impact next year. Montpelier should see a big drop in their tax rate. Now, realize your your appraised values of your houses are going to go up though. So a higher value with a lower rate will probably keep you at about the same place. But the tax rate itself will go down significantly. Libby's talked about the new equalized pupil count and the weighting study. When that hits, it could decrease our numbers dramatically because, as I mentioned, some of our percentages aren't as high as other places. So like free and reduced percentage is lower than maybe some others. ELL may not be as high as others. So we could actually see a drop in equalized pupil count. My hope is that if that is significant, it will be transitioned across time. If it's a drop of, say, 50 kids, that it would be maybe 10 kids per year for 5 years or something along those lines, some kind of a hold harmless in the legislation, perhaps. Enrollment and staffing, we've talked about this. Enrollment is pretty stable. In the higher grades, we're still seeing that increase. In the lower grades is where we're seeing the decrease. But overall, we're pretty stable. The merger incentive, this is the last year we have to worry about absorbing that impact of the 2 cents being gone because we're already at 0. So that's not going to be an issue in the future. So the next slide is just the budget summary that talks about the total budget increase is 4.5. Ed spending is 4. Spending per pupil is 4, which makes sense because I haven't changed our equalized pupil count yet because I don't know what that's going to be. Residential tax rates, that's the good news for tonight. It's a decrease of 0.3 cents in Montpelier. And if you remember last time we talked, it was looking like it could be as much as 9.3 cents increase. So fantastic. In Roxbury, it's a 0.4 cent increase instead of a 9.7 increase. And then the next slide is just a reminder that our ARP ESSER plan is public and can be found at the URL that shows up on the slide for anybody to start digging into. Some of that would come into play. Is not part of our budget. The only thing in our budget is the ESSER funded positions, the proposed ESSER funded positions that we've talked about, which is a small amount of the ESSER funds. But if we start talking about projects, including the projects that our students were just talking about, that might come into play in the ESSER funds that aren't necessarily part of the budget, or in infrastructure funds, which aren't part of the budget. And then the last slide is actually kicking it back to you. If you have any questions or concerns that I should be looking at between now and the 5th, which is, I guess technically we call it a public forum. So if there's anything you need from me or any questions, I'll be happy to try to address it.
So I'm gonna open up a question. I'm actually gonna go head down the hall. My son is playing in a concert.
Have fun.
That's about to start. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, Andrew, and I'm gonna take my stuff in case it's not as long as this board meeting is shorter than anticipated, but But I'll turn over to you, Andrew, and thank you very much, Graham. It was an excellent presentation, and the tax news is always good to hear.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Have fun. Jill?
I just had a quick question, and this may not be something you can answer. I feel like I just read this week that there was some court decision about teacher health care benefits and the required payment. Maybe Montpelier-Roxbury already provides healthcare. It's something about the copay is increasing for some school districts because of this court case. I don't know.
Yeah.
The statewide arbitration,
Yeah.
or that is happening, and we should be in pretty good shape there. One thing is, it doesn't take effect until, it's based on a calendar year. So it would only be half of this year that we're talking about, because it would be January 1st of 2023.
Okay.
And most of what I've seen in the statewide agreement is in alignment with what we offer. The only difference was an out-of-pocket maximum amount that, I'm trying to think of, was it teachers and administrators? And it was like $200 less out of pocket. Yeah, so for the teachers and administrators, it's like $200 for a single plan, $400 for a two-person or family plan. That is lower for them, which we would have to bump up.
Okay.
So worst case scenario for some of our employees for half the year, we may have a little bit more money that we would have to kick in for like the HRA, HSA.
Okay.
But the other thing is, as you know, we've talked about this before, we don't see 100% utilization of our HRAs and HSAs anyway. So I'm not overly concerned, but it is a factor that
Okay.
between now and the 5th, we might look at it again. And if we think it's enough of a risk, we might plug something else in, but I think we'll be okay. I think there's a lot of other districts that maybe are in worse shape than us maybe.
And Grant, I just want to provide clarification for the public and any members of the board who aren't familiar. This is the second statewide teachers healthcare agreement that is being put in place. The first was 2 years, right?
Yeah.
We're in the middle. We're
It was
in the
like
middle
two
of
and
it
a
right
half,
now.
but really 2 calendar years, I think.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. 2.5. And that was a change. Before that, healthcare agreements were negotiated at the individual district level. It didn't impact our district very much, that change.
And it isn't actually, I think a large driver is the teachers, the NEA, but it impacts all employees. And everything I've seen for all support employees, it's identical to what we have now. It's only teachers and administrators that is a little different for out-of-pocket max.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Yeah.
I have another clarifying one. This is actually on the ESSER public plan, which I know we're not talking about right now, but just because they do kind of intersect with the budget. There's a great list of all the different sources of federal funding, section 3 of it. The very last one is called other funding sources to achieve recovery goals, and is also like $2.5 million, whereas our ESSER 3 is 2.23. I was just curious, what are some of those funding sources?
Is that the line that has the potential for infrastructure, an infrastructure package?
Where are you?
Well, if you click on my M, you'll go to where I have the cursor. I think you should be able to do that. That's my cursor.
I have my own.
I'm in section 3. It's the grid that starts with has like funding source allocation.
That's actually, I believe that's this 2.553, but then the context for ESSER 3.
Is in the notes. Yeah. And then ESSER 3 is listed above.
Oh, yeah, I know. Okay, so remember, thanks, Mia. I clicked on the context. I was like, oh yeah, I know this.
Good.
That's like local funds. Remember we talked about how when we first started our ESSER conversation, it was like, it was really important to put the goals of the recovery through the lens of what we are currently doing and how much local funds we're currently spending on things like social work, people like social workers, guidance counselors. So that context there, that document,
Yeah.
was from this budget year, not
Okay.
next budget year, but this
Right.
budget year for the buckets that the recovery plan was in. Remember
So,
we had that conversation?
got it. So the 2.5 million are local funds we are spending this year.
Right.
That meet some of the
Recovery,
requirements or
yes.
whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not money we can expect coming in.
No, it's not new money. It's money we are already spending.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
That should probably be clear in the public plan. I'll make a note to myself.
All right.
Grant, you mentioned the one position that moving out of ESSER. Does that mean we lose out on the ESSER funds or the?
No,
for
it's,
that-
that position was actually funded for, we planned to fund it for 2 years using ESSER two money. So it actually opens up ESSER two money for something else. And, we'll see what, we're gonna talk about that maybe next week to see what else we might want to do with that availability. ESSER two is a little more flexible even than ESSER three. So it doesn't stop us from using it. We'll use it. We'll just use it for something else. But the exciting thing for me is I've seen how important that position is. And now to know that it's not relying on federal funds anymore, I can breathe a sigh of relief that it's going to be in the budget now and it'll be secure.
Yeah,
So-
that does make sense. I was just curious.
Yeah, we
what
will
happens
still
to
be
that
able to
So
fund.
use
we'll be looking
It's-
at what we want to, so it frees up ESSER two funds. So we've actually been talking the last couple weeks or last couple days. If we move the community liaison out of ESSER two, what then will we use ESSER two from? Because the deadline for applying for all of those funds in ESSER two is, yeah, it's
Yeah.
coming up soon. Not to use them, but to apply for them.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
So we've been talking about that. For instance, one idea we have, so now that's the next question, right? Is the internet outages that we were experiencing the last 2 weeks was due to our security cameras. And archaic security cameras across the district, having to upload new software to try and support them, that totally messed up our internet and opened us up to some outside miscreants trying to get into our system, which is why our internet was so fluky for a whole week and a half. So we've talked about upgrading our security systems, our security camera system across the district, mainly because of that.
And it's so bad that the company that actually installed it back in the day, they don't even exist anymore. So there's no way, there's nobody providing service to help with any kind of problems we have. So
So,
It's-
so that's kind
No
of just
support.
popped up, and so it's an expense, it's a big expense about what we were using to pay Nick's salary, ironically enough, so we were like, would that be something that, so we wouldn't have to, talk about fund balance for that, could we put that in ESSER two? That's just an idea that we're throwing around.
Is that something that would be eligible for ESSER two
We
funds?
think so, we're not
Okay.
positive, that's a question that we're still working on.
Okay.
We think so.
we've come up with an argument or two.
Of course.
I like that approach too, because we're taking that ongoing structural cost, building it into the budget, especially in such a good budget year like
Yeah.
we're experiencing. And then using that money for.
Yeah, and
For
that would be a
one-time cost.
one-time, that would be a relatively on a longer duration, one-time expense, which would be perfect for ESSER two funds.
Right.
So that does make sense. Just out of curiosity, Libby, you mentioned equalized pupils and we had outside consulting firm to come in. Just out of curiosity, was that a net, what was the net effect that you guys figured out? Well, the equalized
We don't
people,
know yet.
okay,
We-
went up
we-
or because of that it went down?
Well, no, it went up,
It went
for
up,
our count went up,
okay,
so we
okay,
are now counting more pupils than we have
that's a
before.
good thing. yeah.
That's a very good thing, yep. So we'll see if it nets out with what the AOE comes back with in terms of equalized pupils, but, yeah.
So how does this work? We submit this and then the AOE has to approve it? Or they correct it?
No, we submit it, Grant probably knows better than I do. We submit it and then they have some mathematical formula that nobody quite understands, except for Brad James. and
Yeah,
who's
exactly.
the guy at the AOE, and they spit out the equalized number to us.
So what we submit is basically the average daily membership. And so we submit that for last year or last year, and we just submitted it for this year. So our data that we feed in is the average daily membership. And that's the data that we know now is good, solid data, whereas we were having problems before. The challenge and why I say it's kind of a mystery is because once that kicks in, I have no idea. Brad James is a person at the Agency of Education. He puts that in and then he collects the data on all the free and reduced percentages, the ELL percentages, the pre-K numbers for every district, runs that across and puts in all those weighted factors, applies all those. And then it comes out to a number. And that number would end up being like 113,000 kids. And then, of course, there's only like 90,000 kids in Vermont. So then he applies some factor to everybody to bring it down to 90,000. So that's why even though we might have our ADM each year going up, and I get all excited thinking, oh, I can't wait to see the equalized pupil. If other people have even bigger increases or bigger percentages for some of those weighted factors, even though our ADM goes up, our equalized pupil could end up going down. So it's a really almost impossible thing. I mean, if you get frustrated by the tax rate calculation, you'd really get frustrated by trying to make sense of the equalized pupil count. But our piece is that ADM, and because of this company that we've begun working with, we feel really good about the quality of our data. So if it goes down, it's not going to be because of us. It'll be because of just statewide factors.
Okay. Thanks.
On to Emma, right? Any questions?
Well, first, I want to thank you for everything that you do all the time. Thank you for the terminology. That was really helpful to just have that. And for the tax rate history, that was very helpful for me. And then I have a newbie question around the conservative numbers and what your experience has been when you play with those numbers being conservative. Like what happens once you put in the numbers, the budget passes, and then so what is the...
Yeah, I think last year we actually looked at some of this because last year we had a dollar yield. Was it just last year? Because I actually looked really good one year because I didn't use the dollar yield that the tax commissioner provided. And
I
it
think it
wasn't
was
not
last
because
year.
the tax commissioner made an error. It's just because we knew some economic factors had changed. So I used a more favorable dollar yield and it ended up being within like $3 at the very end. So that was a good thing. The problem this year is I have never seen, since we started with the new way to calculate, I've never seen a dollar yield do what this is looking like it's going to do. It's never gone up by that much. So when I say conservative, I'm taking the lower number out of the recommendation. If I took the higher number, then the tax rate would even be lower, but it's just so unheard of that the dollar yield has gone that high in 1 year. That's why I'm a little nervous about doing that. Whereas in the past, I have not been afraid of using a higher yield, but this year I just don't have any insight that would lead me to believe that I should vary from what's in there. So a conservative number there is not helping the tax rate. A more aggressive number would make the tax rate lower. For CLA, I'm taking a fairly conservative number because I think the CLA has a real chance this year of dropping dramatically because now we have two really high sales data numbers out of the 3 years because it's a 3-year average. 2 out of 3 years now are going to be really high sales numbers. So I'm trying to be a little conservative there to make sure that we don't get a bad surprise. The good news is for the CLA, we're going to know that pretty quick. And so on January 5th, when we do the public forum, that's one big unknown that will be known. So then it's really just whether we have any insight, and Andrew is better at this than me, but at some point, if there's more insight into the statewide economic health that leads us to believe that we should do something different for that dollar yield, then we'll bring that to you. I will tell you that almost every colleague I have, they use the tax commissioner's number. And the AOE unofficially recommended that we use the lower number. And I think it would make sense, if I was king for a day, this is a great number and rates are in a good place. This is a great opportunity to capture that $90,000 surplus and put it in the bank while we have a chance. So I'm hoping that that's what they do. Was there any other conservative number that was?
No, I'm just trying to translate it into what happens. So once it passes, our numbers are, like, those unknowns are gone.
Whenever we go in for the informational hearing, the day before town meeting, everything is going to be solid with the exception of the dollar yield, which gets set by law.
Okay.
And, it's always like that.
The legislature sets it after voters vote on budgets.
And a lot of times it does end up getting set higher than what, it's frustrating because you fight to try to get a budget passed with a tax rate that ends up being higher than what it really is, But this year, I just don't know how it's going to play out.
In recent years, there have been budget surpluses, and especially before the pandemic, because the economy was performing at a reliably healthy rate, and the governor and legislature were coming to agreement on a number of policies, which included essentially keeping tax rates pretty level for a number of years, and they did that by boosting the dollar yield from what was initially anticipated. That's like high level kind of explanation.
Now, the one number that isn't, well, I guess it might be considered conservative. The equalized pupil count is still an unknown. And by keeping it level, I thought initially maybe I was being conservative, but it really is a pure unknown for me. So right now, I think the best guess is just to leave it where it was this year and then wait for it. And hopefully we will have a pretty solid number by January 5th on that one too. I expect by next week, probably, to get at least the first draft from the AOE.
Emma?
I don't have very many questions, and I think that's sort of attributed to how clear you have been presenting these budget presentations. So I really appreciate the clarity and sort of the educational tone that you take when you're presenting it to us. It's really helpful. Can you tell me, as long as I've been following, I don't think I remember seeing a drop in taxpayer, in the amount that people will be paying on their house. Have you seen a drop in the past 10 years or so?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was just talking to Christina about a chart that we threw in there last year that showed tax rates. And it's hard because there's two different tax rates, right? Because of the CLA,
Right.
Roxbury versus Montpelier. But just to take a snapshot, I have a slide that shows the change in education spending from year to year and what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then I have in a little text box what the tax rate did that year.
Yeah.
And the first year, the ed spending went up like $1 million and the tax rate went down like 0.2. And the next year, it was only like a $400,000 increase and the tax rate went up like 8 cents or something. There's like no correlation between our spending
Right.
and the final tax rate. But I will say, I think it was in FY19, the year after the merger, the tax rates were lower. And there shouldn't have been any kind of reappraisal. So theoretically, people should have seen lower tax rates in Montpelier in 19. And I think for several years, Roxbury should have seen it because the year before the merger, they were hit with that excess penalties, excess spending penalty, which meant they got double taxed. So in FY18, their tax rate was really high.
Okay.
And so they have seen decreases, I would say probably in multiple years.
Yeah.
But for Montpelier, I think since I've been here, the actual tax rate, I think has only gone down once. So with any luck, this could be the second. But
Yeah. I think people are going to be really happy, and just with the federal funding that's coming our way and the healthy fund balance, we've been able to present a budget that I think is really generous and good for the district and still see a savings. So I'm really impressed with that. My other question, and I don't know if we need to spend time on it tonight, but just based on the public input that we received from the students, I mean, in that moment when they were giving their feedback or, their testimony, I was thinking like, is there something that we can give them, just sort of like a little bullet point of progress and where we're at and some of the things that are in the ESSER spending proposals that might be speaking to the net zero, mission. And I think the other part of their testimony was to be asking us for an actual policy or a plan. So that could be dealt with separately, and maybe the policy committee could reach out to it was called the Earth Group. Yeah. But so I don't know if there's like a very quick, like 30-second kind of overview of some of the stuff that we've done, because I know obviously there's windows are happening in the capital plan, and I'm sure there's other
Yeah,
things.
we buy into a solar field. So we have,
offset.
I'm not gonna say it exactly right.
Yeah.
We need Andrew LaRosa here, but we do work with solar field through a student. It was a student presentation who brought it to us a couple of years ago. And Andrew worked with that student. I think the student's uncle owns it or something like that. But I can get Andrew LaRosa to talk more about that if you'd like. We couldn't get a contractor to do it, but we have purchased and have ready to go heat pumps over at Roxbury. We just couldn't find somebody to do it in the fall. So that's on target to get accomplished.
And the heat pumps at Roxbury was something that they presented to us as a big
Yes.
thing that could really help.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So that will happen. We
Great.
have them.
Yeah,
We've
yeah.
ordered them. We just can't get anybody to put them in for us.
Yeah.
So hopefully that will happen in the spring. Before we did that, we did a lot. I had Andrew do a mold and just an assessment of air quality at Roxbury too, to make sure that there weren't, we weren't going to put heat pumps in to hide any problems because of the moisture that building can suck in being at the bottom of a hill. So we did that big testing and it came out great, actually. It came out much better than we actually thought it would. We've also, Andrew's so much better than this. He's looked into different heating sources here. In Andrew's professional opinion, we should wait for the infrastructure piece. There's a challenge to it. So when you're talking about different types of heating sources that have been brought to the attention to the board, you're also talking about like putting silos up. And so that would take away from fields. We have a limited amount of space to do some of the work. So Andrew really would like to wait for infrastructure dollars to really think about those kind of big ticket items because they are very expensive to do when you're talking about usage of space that are currently pretty used. If you come out here on a fall day, there's not a green space that doesn't have a team on it. So we've been talking about that too.
And we spent considerable money from the CRF bucket, which was focused on heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And a lot of that was not only just to improve air quality, but a little thing like changing to variable speed motors so that like when you didn't need it, it would slow down and not use as much electricity. There was a lot of that kind of stuff that was going on that's ventilation related that people wouldn't know about. And I'm sure that, and I'd have to go back, but Andrew does, calls it a facilities plan.
Facilities overview, yeah.
So
There's a lot of stuff in there.
there's a lot, and
Yeah.
it might be a good thing for him to do a presentation that just focuses on efficiency issues.
Yeah.
Because we have done a lot that people wouldn't know because, we probably don't do as good of a job as we can trying to
Yeah.
toot our own horn, like,
Every vehicle we have is electric or hybrid. Almost
yeah,
every
well,
vehicle.
almost, yeah. But like the driver's ed vehicle is a complete electric vehicle, which we did try to do some press on that, but not a whole lot. But
Yeah.
we got hybrid vans, and so we've done a lot, but we could be better at trying to make sure people knew about it.
Yeah, I get that sense. And so I guess that's what I'm hoping to, maybe I'll reach out to you, Libby, just to see if we can maybe circle back to the Earth Group and provide them with some of that information. information.
Yeah, and
or-
if the board would like, once we get through the budgeting process, to have Andrew come do this is what we've done in terms of work towards climate with our buildings and structures and things we have control over. This is where we could grow, should the board want to move in that direction. This is Andrew's opinion of those things, because he certainly has them. But we'd be more than happy to have him come in to do that.
And maybe we could invite the
Earth
the
Group.
students, the Earth Group to that presentation. And maybe
And-
that was sort of,
Andrew meets with them regularly.
so they already know what
Yeah.
we're doing. Okay.
And one of the big things that we do that people might not know is we're part of the district heat with the city. So Union Elementary School gets their heat through the city's district heat, which is, I think, wood pellet.
Yeah.
And it actually costs a lot. It costs more than heating other buildings, but that's because it was related to a bond. And so at some point that should come back down. But that is one building that is definitely participating with the city hand in hand.
Yeah.
But just as a reminder, and you called it out, it's not really something to do with the budget, because what we did was we just put in positions that we really feel strongly about that relate to ESSER. The big chunk of like projects that we could do, we intentionally didn't put in here because, we don't have solid estimates for some of them. We couldn't say that we've really finished all the engagement that we want to do to be able to say these are the projects. And also, we haven't gotten approval from the AOE through the grant process to even say if they're valid and they would approve them. But that is a bucket of money that is available, that if we can look into it and it makes sense, we certainly could spend it in ways that support that. But yeah, not part of this.
Yeah, thank you for that.
The big part of this, and this came up in our couple of facilities meetings that we've had, and in the city, I think it's BEIC who just issued this energy audit for the city that looked at public buildings and greenhouse gas emissions. And MSMS and MHS are the largest emitters, and it's on the thermal side, it's on the heat side. And the big recommendation coming out of that report, which was kind of higher level, it wasn't super in the weeds the way some other energy audits are. Like if you were to have an energy audit of your house, it didn't get into like that detail. But the recommendation was if we wanted to really reduce greenhouse gas emissions for this building in MSMS, where again, very limited space over there, is to put in like biomass boilers. One of the things that came up, and I was just talking with Mia about this, and I'll keep this really brief, that's come up when I've been talking with people around the community, because I'm not an expert at all in pellet boilers, biomass boilers, absolutely not. So I'm not pretending to be. An issue that's been brought up to me by some people who work in the public health space, as well as in the conservation space, is the end of pipe emissions of biomass. If we were to add that to what we already have in this city, one public health professional brought up concerns about asthma rates related to these types of systems. So that's something that I think we'd want to evaluate with the greenhouse gas emission part. It's a difficult situation to be in. How do you heat these large buildings in a way that's healthy for the planet and healthy for the community? I think, that's the big question for us. Amanda?
It's a different topic. so.
No
Just
problem.
like-
Please, new paragraph.
Moving away, just like thinking and dreaming and thinking long-term, that as we evolve as a board to do this community engagement, and people coming in to bring in these things, that we really should be thinking about how to respond and how to keep like tap somehow of like, here's some of the issues that have been brought, and give reports, like whether it's like like one pagers of, hey, the community asked about climate, here are the things we're doing, hey, the community asked, and just to be that engaged with the community. So like, we're doing all these things, but we should know that we're doing all these things. And and so I think like being able to have that as something that we do when we're thinking communication, that's part of like a communication strategy. So like, just that it is needed to listen and give feedback back, right? Like, and have this evolving mechanism long-term that this is how we, as a district, listens and responds to concerns, ideas, and what from community. So I don't know like how to implement that, or like what is as a board that will put, or is that something? Yeah, so that's to throw out there because it's so important when budget time comes around, just like have that be like, we're already doing that, and here are the things that we are doing.
I wholeheartedly support that statement and just feel like it's been a kind of a struggle because we've been doing these listening sessions, and with the student listening session, for example, I emailed everyone the list of things that they had brought up and sort of wanted to fill in the blanks and provide some feedback to the student group of like where we're at as a district or a board on some of their concerns. And it's going to end up taking months to get back to them. It's just the wheels of democracy turn slowly, and we're all very busy. So yeah, I think it would be really great to sort of build in a mechanism to be a little more responsive.
I think with the students, our plan, if I'm not mistaken, Emma, after our correspondence lately, is we are doing a lot of things already that they're asking for, and it's important to highlight that. And this budget also incorporates some ideas that students have brought forward. So my plan, Grant, I'll be reaching out about a couple of items just to fact check some things.
Yeah.
But our plan is, I think, late January, get back to that big group of students with an overview of what we have been doing and what this budget includes that addresses some of the issues and concerns and priorities they brought to us.
Yeah.
That's just an example. So community engagement discussion, this seems like a good opportunity to pivot there.
Good opportunity for me
sorry.
to leave too.
I'm sorry, Rhett.
I do have
I'm sorry,
one
Rhett.
sort of budget related.
Yeah,
question.
please. We'll hold on.
When it comes to identifying the need for individual assistance, which we have many open positions, how do you determine where you need one, and how does that compete with the many opening, how do you factor in the fact that there are so many positions that can't be filled?
Yeah, good question. Because that was part of our discussion as we were planning the budget this year, actually. So how would they determine our multiple facets, right? The major one is that the IEP team around a student would decide whether or not a student needed additional instructional assistance support, right? That's an IEP team decision based on a student with special needs. Another might be just a school need. So for instance, it's really hard to run an elementary school without somebody out there monitoring recess and lunch. And in our teacher contract for Union Elementary School, teachers don't do that. So you need somebody to do that, right? So it would be an instructional assistant who typically takes on that role. Another thing we thought about that's besides what's kind of connected to the IEP process, but it's not, is that we have students, flexible pathways, students who go to all kinds of different things during the day here at the high school who need rides. And so we've talked about, are we paying a faculty member, a teacher, or even an administrator, a pretty high salary to drive students around, right? Could that be done by somebody else? So that's a different piece that we've thought about. But this year in particular, in the budget conversation, we talked, administrator said, I need an IA for, like driving was a good example for flex pathways. And Grant's able to say, well, we have 8 openings right now. We have IEP services covered for the most part right now. Maybe not with the person ideally that we want to cover, but we have them covered. And IAs right now are strapped. Absolutely. I'm looking at Carlin Kinnaman's name on the public, who's one of our absolutely fabulous IAs at Union Elementary School. And they may be very strapped. However, we've got the needs covered. But Grant's saying we got 8 openings still, because we never have riffed any of those positions because it's a union position. So if you lose an IA position, you're riffing it. But we've just continued to budget for it. They've just gone as unfilled positions. So when MHS, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you, Amanda. I'm sorry. Reduction in force. So instead of adding an IA position for the van for flexible pathways, Grant said, could we use one of these open positions as part of their job description would be to drive students around. So we had lots of conversations around that
In the
piece.
Thrive, two for Thrive
Yeah,
programs.
for the alternative programming for social emotional behavior and social skills, we talked about if we have all these openings for instructional assistants, then when we're able to hire, we're hiring with the idea of looking at the Thrive or the Rise program at UES. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, is it common for IAs to move in as substitutes when the need comes up? And is that, are they frequently being pushed in a lot of different directions and unable to
This year they
do?
are.
And sort of unable to provide that
Yeah.
support?
This year they are. We do have it in their contract. We negotiated in the last contract a pay structure for IAs who, if we can't find a substitute, if they take that substitute role, then they get an additional payment for that piece. Yep.
Because I'm not sure how much the wider board is aware, but historically at Roxbury, I mean, in any classroom, you have two ends, sort of. The side that needs a lot of support and the side that needs a lot of effort just to challenge them. And when you're talking about a first and a second grade in one room, that spectrum is so much wider. Third and fourth grade in one room, so much wider, especially with, I mean, maybe with less kids, it's even wider because you don't have as common a middle ground as you would in a larger classroom, potentially. I'm not sure. That's sort of the spirit of the question of the IAs and how that gets used. And I know that the per pupil spending is high, but it's a historical problem that a lot of kids are feeling like, "Oh, I'm actually bored."
Yeah, I don't know if hiring a structural assistants would solve that.
Wouldn't help.
I don't know. I'm not saying it would or it wouldn't. But when we're talking about educating our children, our instructional assistants are an essential part of that piece, particularly for kids who have needs that are executive functioning type needs, or, you know, if there's a learning impairment where dressing might be an issue, or some sort of movement challenge, or speech or toileting or something like that. However, if you're talking about addressing the needs of a classroom solely, and I would argue that any classroom has that range, as a former first and second grade teacher.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
I think there are different things we want to look at than adding an instructional assistant into that space. I'm not sure if that would be the answer to solve that.
So I'm sensitive to the time. It's 7:36. Is it everybody all right moving on to community engagement?
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Grant.
We'll see you on the fifth.
Thank you, Grant.
Have a good holiday break.
Be well, Graham. Thank you. Community engagement discussion. Is this the 15 minutes that we added on previously? I believe it is. Mia, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I'm not sure we need the time, because I think we covered it in the last meeting, but why don't I just recap where I think we landed, and that way people can say, oh, that's not what I thought it was, and then we do need the time.
Sounds good.
Well, what we were focused on in the last meeting was community engagement, particularly of communities, our BIPOC families, families with LGBTQIA kiddos, families with kiddos on with special ed, potentially literacy as well. And I'm looking at Amanda and then also Kristen, because we talked about this at the equity committee on Tuesday. We also talked about a listening session with Roxbury families. All of it focused on the work, like gathering input that we can share then with the administration as they think about and land an ESSER 3 plan. And where I think we landed last board meeting was that the board thought that was an important thing to do, such that we are going to offer that support to the administration ourselves and facilitate those listening sessions and then hand over what we gather in a nutshell is where, and so that's.
Yeah, that's as I recall it too. Does anybody have any questions? Want any further discussion on this? I actually have a question. No one else does. Does the equity committee are you gonna come back to the board with a proposal about this is how we'd like to handle this? How do you suggest we move forward with
We
this?
can share that right now.
Great.
We had the date of January 15th in mind, that was a deadline to get information to Libby and the other administrators. So Amanda and Kristen are organizing the listening sessions for the first week of January or the beginning of that following week, so that we have the information and we get it to the administration. And I think that's as simple as that.
Is it the type of thing where it would be helpful for a bunch of board members to attend, or do we think it would be better to have fewer board members? What is the suggestion?
Good question. We're thinking specifically about, we really like these to be affinity spaces,
Mhm.
so that folks have that common ground and that comfort level with sharing what their concerns and dreams are.
Mhm.
And so, would you like to share who you have?
Sure. So I have someone that will help me facilitate from a community member who will help me facilitate all of the sessions from that identity. So, so I have someone already from the Disability of the Special Ed, who's the executive director of the new organization named All Brains Belong in Vermont, and she's gonna help me facilitate a special ed conversation. I'm meeting with her on Friday, actually for coffee. I have the BIPOC affinity space. I have my friend Sarika Tandem, who's a racial justice activist, former member of the district-wide equity committee. She's gonna help me facilitate the BIPOC group. I can be part of both the special ed and BIPOC because both my kids have an IEP. So I will be taking notes and just being there present for both the BIPOC and I'm also gonna get someone from the LGBTQ community. I will not be in that one because that is an affinity space. I'm asking someone from there to take notes and make sure that we have, like the format that they need. If any of us identifies as
Mara might be a good person. Mara Iverson.
Yes, but I'm saying like from the board, if anybody identifies as a member of the LGBTIQ plus community, that could be a space for you. If not, then we'll have a committee member that can help.
And you're saying
Mara is
also,
a consultant now. I'm meeting with Outright tomorrow, but if we have money to pay Mara to help facilitate, I will not ask her to do it for free. But we could pay her a stipend. But I'm meeting with B from Outright tomorrow to see, having lunch, see if she will help me facilitate that one. But I also have Julia who I'm going to ask. To agree before that was it.
Might be a few staff members too that might be interested in that.
Yeah. And then we did get that email from Angela and a few other ones that want to have that literacy conversation. I was gonna reach out to Mia. I was gonna introduce Mia to do the triage to have that conversation to see, since we haven't really landed whether or not they're gonna come to present to us or what we should do. And then Kristen, you want to talk about Roxbury and what we talk about? You want to?
Sure. Yeah, can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound
Okay,
great.
great. Yeah, so we discussed having a listening session in Roxbury. I think what came to mind for me after seeing the report from the Infrastructure Thought Exchange is that we had 2 respondents that identified as Roxbury community members, which gave me some concern that, are we getting the Roxbury voice here? I have been doing a little bit more groundwork to get the Thought Exchange circulated in Roxbury. I know Beth Kellogg, the principal at RBS, put it out in the weekly buzz, and RBS PTO put it out, and just been doing some outreach to folks kind of directly. But I just want to make sure that we're definitely capturing the Roxbury community voice around these topics, and so that we have kind of a limited window. Also, I know we only have 2 more days left in the Thought Exchange, and I don't know what our community's participation has been, and I don't know what the timing for the report would be, Libby, but I just want to really make sure that we're capturing Roxbury folks around the ESSER 3 topics. So we are able to use the Roxbury Free Library as a space, and just I know Amanda has a number of facilitators that she's coordinating with for her meetings. So once she has hers lined up, we're kind of going to figure out where Roxbury can fall in the lineup in terms of scheduling.
Kristen, one thing on the thought exchange that I just realized, it's kind of the way that we set it up, it's kind of impossible to know how many Roxbury parents have done it because it's the choices are parents or guardian of a MRPS student. Like it's not,
By school.
it's not by
But can't
town.
you
It's not by-
check? But can't you check multiple?
Yeah, you can check multiple, and there's another one for a Roxbury community member. So that
Right.
might be a person who lives in Roxbury who doesn't have a child in the school.
Right. I guess I was also thinking, I mean, maybe there's Roxbury parents who are kind of just checking, the parent caregiver box and not also checking the
Right,
Roxbury box.
that could totally be happening, but it's, you can't tell
Right.
how many Roxbury people have participated.
Right. Well, I think the Montpelier, and it could be just community members, but that registered at something like 42. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, we should definitely do some kind of targeted outreach to Roxbury in case, that's capturing a reality in terms of feedback.
Yeah, I just don't know if we can say, I can't tell how many Roxbury people have
Right.
filled this
Yeah.
out.
It seems like it can't hurt, to do a little bit
I just
more
want to make
outreach
sure
out
we're
there.
clear on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Anything else on that? I personally really appreciate this. Thank you all for working into this.
I have a question. There is a attempt at discussing Roxbury Village Schools comprehensive needs assessment on Monday. And can any of that information overlap and inform any of this, or is it separate from this, or?
I didn't know if that was happening.
That's,
Is that being
that's
hosted
something
at the
that's being facilitated by Beth.
Uh-huh.
And I don't, can any of that information?
Of course it will.
It
Yeah,
can?
that's
Okay.
absolutely bring it to us.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure that there's so many different, there's so many different outreach initiatives, and I don't know where exactly, they all seem very much overlapping in many ways.
That's a part of every leadership conversation we have around this kind of stuff. So she definitely brings that to the table.
We're promoting that as much as we can.
Yep.
I wanted to clarify, Amanda, do you feel like it would be appropriate in the LGBTQIA group listening session if anybody on the board has a child or a student in the district who also identifies that way? Would they be then potentially invited to that? Okay. I just wanted, because I wasn't sure, you having the student that has an IEP is pretty different.
Yes.
Experience than having a child. I don't know. So I wasn't sure if that would translate. As
Yeah, no, I
still
think
being
if
a
you
safe
have,
space.
if you have a child that is identified as LGBTQIA community, I mean, the students are also invited, but it is like if you have a child,
Yeah.
especially if you have a child in elementary school. you understand some of the needs, yes. So,
Do we want to do an additional equity committee update on top of that,
We
or?
can just add a couple more things.
Okay.
That's the big one.
Yeah,
That's the
that, I
big
mean,
one.
that's,
That's our biggest priority. The second priority is the school climate survey. So Andrew has agreed he's going to be reaching out to the teachers union so we can start hopefully like beginning of the new year, start working with them on finalizing that. In the minutes from our meeting on Tuesday, which is in the board packet, you can see we drafted a timeline so that for not just the finalization of writing the survey, but also all the way through to teachers taking the survey,
Yeah.
giving us their feedback and us having a report. So just that's, I won't read those dates off because they're in our minutes. That's.
thank you for doing that.
Sure. Those are two really big ones. The other just things on our sort of grand to-do list are, we think we might be the place to incubate the new board member packet. So we'll take that on. And then as the policy committee assigns us policies for review. So that's our general, we just wanted to give an update on kind of what we're seeing as our scope of work for the next several months. Did I
Anyone-
miss anything, Amanda, Kristen?
Anyone have any questions for the equity committee? And also the equity tool that came out of the equity committee and the policy committee
Right.
a couple meetings ago.
That's a lot. Thank you.
Well, a quick follow-up, because we're transitioning to a policy. Has the policy committee been using that tool? Have you found it helpful so far? I realize that's been a bunch of time.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely moving at a very slow pace.
Sure.
And right now, we've been focusing on this new required policy, and we have used the tool with that, yes.
Cool. Yeah, it was really nice to get the news that our policies weren't all expiring this year.
Yeah.
Yes, we can
No
take a
kidding.
breather. And
Yeah.
at a rapid pace.
All right. So with that, I think we should move on to the special education policy. Does Amanda, Emma, you want to provide just a
Yes, yes,
general
yes.
overview of?
I mean, I don't know.
I could start.
Sure, no, we're just gonna talk about that. Well, I can. And then
I'll fill in the blanks, yeah.
fill in the blanks. Okay, so the special education policy is a required policy that is going to be into effect January 15, 2021. 2022. And I've had several meetings or like back and forths with the School Board Association as to why the policy came into effect and why it was needed. And it was basically, what was the?
It essentially boiled down to like Vermont has not been, as a statewide, Vermont has not been in compliance with special ed law, you know, sort of just in general. And so this, having the schools have this policy on the books with the school board ensures that it will be folded into the policy monitoring schedule. And so we will have to take a look at how we are you know, meeting the legal requirements for special ed kids in our district on the same pace as all of our other policies.
And it's basically directing the districts to follow a manual that the Agency of Education is currently drafting. So this policy right now points to the special education manual that does not exist yet. So the last we've heard was that the AOE requested an extension and they have been granted, but that hasn't come down to us. So like effectively, we're supposed to follow the policy, pass the policy by January 15, but the manual is still not in place. So the VSBA is waiting and they will update us as soon as I will have it. In this policy at the bottom, I put cross-reference that should be taken off because that's not the manual. So we need to remove that. So yeah, we're just waiting for the guidelines so that we can link it to the policy, and that's essentially what it is. It's directing us to follow the manual that the special ed department at AOE is crafting, which basically tells us how to follow the rules. And then we are supposed to then monitor that policy to ensure that we are following the special ed law.
And the only, this language is exactly how the agency, or sorry, the Vermont Schools Boards Association drafted their, what are they called? Model policies.
policy?
Model policies. So we didn't change anything except for plugging in our name, and then Amanda made the change at the bottom. So we want to, you know, the equity tool didn't apply to like a lot of this, but the main thing that sort of bubbled up using the equity tool was like wanting to make sure that the language of this policy was as accessible as it possibly could be to parents and caregivers with students in the special ed system in our district. And that when they go to read this, they're not just confused, which I think it is a little confusing when you first read it. It's like, so why do we have this? So the only thing that we talked about as a committee was adding a link to the manual so that that was like very easy to access and go straight from the policy to the manual. And then potentially adding a sentence or two at the top to give context around the reason why we're adopting it as a district is to ensure that it is monitored annually with the rest of our policies. So we've talked to Pietro about doing that. He's hesitant to add language to required policies. But he said we could send him the draft of our proposed language and he'll let us know what he thinks after he reads that. So you may see those two additions at the next meeting.
I think that's,
It's weird to put something saying that we don't know what the manual is gonna be, but we're gonna follow it. I don't know, it just feels weird.
it's,
Welcome
the
to
manual,
my world.
the manual said by statute, so like,
Yeah.
No, I understand that, but it's just.
so yeah, we don't know.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what they're hoping is that by the time we get to our third reading, it'll be ready. So we may end up having to hold up, we talked about that at the committee of, does it make sense to actually pass a policy referring to something that doesn't exist? So I think we're gonna cross that bridge when we come to it. If it doesn't exist yet by January 15th, we have put, we've been trying to, did we put this on tomorrow night's meeting agenda?
It is not warned there. I don't.
No,
think-
it's just the build contract.
Yeah, the second reading of this is on the January 5th.
Fifth, and then the last one's the.
No, the
No.
19th.
So it's gonna, okay,
Oh,
I
wait,
think
so
Jim must have decided, gone solo and made a decision not to put it on tomorrow, which, we were trying to sort of
No,
like
no, because we said we could add it. as consent agenda. Like, we can add it.
after the fact.
To the beginning.
Okay.
Tomorrow?
I'll ask Jim why he didn't. The plan at the policy committee was to put it on tomorrow night's agenda for a second reading so that we could potentially be in compliance by January 15th. So I'll ask Jim why he didn't do that. We also all felt that it was probably okay for us to not be in compliance by 4 days.
Yeah.
So
I can guarantee you that's.
I was gonna say, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's good to keep it the 5th.
yeah, and tomorrow we're pretty busy and I don't think we have time to add that language in for a second reading. So that's what we'll do.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mia?
You mostly answered my questions, I especially that Pietro is hesitant to add language to a required policy, but I would just, agree with you that I think it could use a little bit more context.
Yeah.
The things that stood out to me, and I understand, we need to be in compliance with the law, but I also wondered if, especially for that accessibility to parents who have, or anyone in our district, just some kind of like, this actually is why we have the manual and the policy in the first place, is that we expect of ourselves that we provide the kind of support that every single student needs, regardless of what their needs are. So something that is even more than just, we have a policy so that we're in compliance with the law,
Yes.
but like something that shows that the district is really behind their kids.
We talked about exactly that, sort of like the vision and,
Yeah.
content and context and intent. And not just on this policy, for every policy we're talking about, some of our policies have that.
Yeah.
At the top of the policy.
Yeah.
And then some of our policies don't.
Right.
And so then the question is how sort of involved with our vision for as a district and related as it relates to this policy can we get
Right.
in accordance with Pietro's advice.
Right.
So, but
And this might be one where he goes, heck no. But
Right.
the other thing that felt like a gap to me was that it doesn't really name accountability in here. I mean, it says we have to follow follow the law, but just between like the superintendent is responsible for X and the board is responsible for Y, it feels like that could actually be very helpful, again, for people in the district who are sort of like, we've had a number of families come, and people talk to Libby about this, but people have also come to the board and say, you must do something about literacy or special education. And it would be helpful for all of us, I think, to be on the same page about what is it that the board can actually do about special education? And what is it that is the administration's responsibility,
so we had quite
I
a
think
conversation.
Yeah, I think what's hard is that we haven't seen this manual.
Right,
So
yeah.
the manual is supposed to have that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily like that, whether the board or the administration, but so.
The data and accountability.
Like what you have to do. So it's like, okay.
Yeah.
So we have to wait for that.
Yeah.
We have to wait for that to be able to
But that
Good
was on
point.
our radar and
Right.
it was a big part of our, like exactly what you just said was a big part of our conversation when using the equity tool was like, where are these measures and how do we address it? And then we're sort of making the leap of faith that it most likely will be in this Vermont Special Education Procedures and Practices Manual. And we're hopeful that it will be, but we will find out.
And if it's not, we can always go back and revise our own policy.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly, after the 15th
yep,
or 9th.
that's
Or
what I was just about to add.
Or
Yeah.
February. Or March.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions on that?
No,
I move to adjourn.
a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any naysayers?
Not Anakin.
7:59. Wow.
It's a quickie.